All right, so we're going to resume the biological and ecosystem science presentation. We're now on the last section on fishing technology, and I'll let Claude Dijkstra tell you the recent activities related to new catch protection methods. So go ahead, Claude.
All right, thanks everybody. I'll just note on the bottom of this slide, in addition to the whale depredation work, we make a note of some other bycatch reduction work that we've recently been doing. One is on use of LED lights, and the other one is related to hook modifications. See me at a break to check out the hook modifications. I have one of the appendage hooks here, and I can talk about how it works and what we've done with it, and what opportunities there might be going forward with that technology. So the IPHC, as you guys, most of you know, have been working on coming up with some other tools in the toolbox to help protect longline catch. And back in 2021, we had a workshop with people that are being affected by this challenge worldwide. It identified shuttles and shrouds as two possible or promising technologies that can help protect the catch once it's on the gear. And we further tested both of those devices and decided that the shuttle was the more promising way to go after some pilot work. And to further that work, we wanted to go out and test it in the presence of depredating whales. So this past summer in late May, we went out to Dutch Harbor. We contracted with the FV Oracle and skippered by Robert Hansen. Many of you probably know him. Ian, Josep, and myself were all out on the vessel, as was the inventor behind the shuttle. He's a gentleman out of Norway. So we had a very packed boat between us and all the crew. We went out and did 18 sets of gear, 15 which had successful comparisons between the shuttle gear and the control catch. We wanted some sets preferably with whales, some preferably without, just so we could get a good kind of handle on performance of the device, safety profile of the device, best way to attach it and connect it, and all those sorts of things. We did have 6 sets in the presence of depredating orcas. We collected a lot of underwater footage, so we had cameras on both the control gear and the shuttle itself. And we've got lots of data to go through now. So there's a picture of the vessel. The shuttle itself is in the second image there. For those who don't know how it works, it is threaded onto the ground line on a section of blank line. It, based on gravity, just heads down towards the bottom, and as the gear is being hauled up, and it keeps sliding forward on a set of pulleys as the gear is being lifted off the bottom. Fish enter the front or the wider end of that device, and they come inside of it. They're then released, and the empty hook goes out the back of the device and up to the boat. It then encounters a pre-installed stopper and rides the stopper up to the surface, hopefully protecting the catch inside of it on the way up. The third image is obvious depredation damage. Often the signs of it are either empty hooks, but you don't know if they were just empty or whether something was taken, or sometimes they leave evidence behind, like lips or heads. So that's a set of lips that you see in the third image. And the image on the right is several hungry orcas that were charging straight at the boat. A bit disconcerting. You think, geez, are you guys going to stop? They would charge right up the side of the boat. And they didn't seem to be actively depredating at the time. It was unclear what they were doing, but the rest of the pod was a good 200 yards off, appearing to just be at the surface, but we suspect we're diving down on the gear while we were doing our activity. So here are the cameras I was referring to. We had 4 of them. The first one up top there is a long line camera, and it was monitoring the control gear, and it would be scheduled to turn on roughly 15 minutes to an hour before haulback, and then it would be watching the gear as it went towards the surface. The next 3 cameras are all on the shuttle itself. There was one external on number 2 there on the upper right. And that's looking for fish that, as they're coming up to the shuttle, are too big or something like that, and they don't actually come inside the shuttle. Instead, they get sloughed off to the side. We wanted to know how many we were missing, if any. And then inside the shuttle, you can see on camera 3 and 4, those are actually kind of images of the same thing, but that is a bidirectional camera. There's one camera looking forward towards the fish coming in, again, trying to capture how many fish are making it inside the device. And then there's another camera looking at the back, seeing how many go right through the device and how are they being released. So this is an example of fish exclusions. This is footage from the external camera. So here you can see some sablefish that as the hook goes to enter the device, it kind of whiplashes off to the side and the fish is released and goes off to the side. On the right, you're seeing a rockfish, same sort of result. This is that rear-looking camera, and this is showing some pass-throughs. So halibut sometimes go right through that thing, but more commonly it was sablefish or peacod would go clearly through it. And we would get them generally up at the surface, and we knew that the device had gone down that piece of equipment, so we knew it was a pass-through, and we could confirm it here with the camera footage. This is coming into the device, so this is showing fish coming in and then being released. Oops, let's go back one. A little hard to control with the mouse here. Let's try this. So on the left, they're coming in, and on the right, they're being released inside the device. So here you see a fish coming in, and then you'll see it goes to there, the hook gets pulled out of the mouth, and the fish is now inside the device. And then these are fish that escaped. So we were very busy while we were out there, and we did not check quite right. But on the left-hand side, that round thing in the upper left, that is this one end of the stopper device. There's two sections to it. There's a stopper external that's supposed to close that exterior door. And then there's one internally that kind of blocks that keyhole shape that you saw earlier. Turned out the rope distance between the two was not dialed in properly. So as the device came to the surface, we would lose fish. So we call these escapes, and we are able to track those and count those. But that is an easily fixable problem. We can kind of shut that right down, but it was not quite dialed in for the tests we did. So looking just at general production, this is our 5 main species that we caught. Pacific halibut at the top, and we knew people would be interested in sablefish or Pacific cod catch as well. And so on the footage we've gone through so far, we've had 89 encounters of halibut. One of those excluded to the outside. Of the 88 that went inside, 90% were entrained, and roughly 8 of them passed right through the device. And those were smaller halibut. We have size data on all of that. For sablefish, we caught a lot, 160. Most of those went internal to the device, but a lot of them, close to 20% of them, passed right through it, or up to 30% of them escaped. So that wasn't the best entrainment rate, just around 50%. But again, that can be easily dialed in by having the stoppers in the proper spot. And then you can see the retention rates for peacod, rockfish, and skates. And the rockfish numbers may be a little skewed. A lot of those rockfish were heavily sand fleed. So that's just kind of a summary of the number of hooks that we've seen through the footage we've gone through. Like I said, species morphology seems to be pretty important in the retention outcomes, particularly with the stoppers not tightened right in. It was fairly easy for the cylindrical animals to get back out. The retention rates, like I said, can easily be modified on that front. We were also able to capture some footage of killer whales swimming around the ground line, which was cool. I'll come to that in a little bit. These are some graphs of the actual, what we saw on the control in the blue bars by set number. The light blue is when we got lips only, and where you see a dorsal, we knew we had whales around us. And the orange bar is what we found in the shuttle. So we're comparing catch rates here by numbers of fish on the left-hand side. And so you can see that they had, in some cases, pretty similar catch rates, like, sets number 1 and 5. At times when we had whales around, it was kind of inconclusive. If you look at 2, we had, slightly less catch in the shuttle, or set number 10. Set number 10 was interesting, where we were excited because we had a lot of lips come to the surface. And we're like, all right, here we go. Here's the true test. And then when the shuttle came up, it had fish in it, but none of them were halibut. They were all rockfish. And what it looks like happened was the control gear, it was all one section of gear, but the first 4 skates of control gear were in halibut habitat. We then threaded on the device on the blank skate, and then we went into rockfish habitat, because we had no rockfish in those first 4 skates. Could the whales have taken them? Yes, but from most of the stuff we hear is they generally won't. So it's somewhat inconclusive, but we know that it's capable of good retention. If you look at set number seven there, we had 46 halibut in the shuttle off of 200 hooks. So it's able to entrain them well, but we had other factors that were making it difficult to interpret the results to some degree, whether that was changes in species composition between the sections of gear. We had some crab pot snarls both on the control gear and on the shuttle gear, so it's a little hard to interpret, but we know that the device works quite well as far as its ability to entrain animals and bring them up to the surface. Yes. Yeah. So it's a good question. Is there any mortality in there? We did track injuries to the fish, which are quite, predictive of discard mortality survival. And we tracked all that. We haven't summarized it all yet, but certainly the device in some ways acts like a de facto fish stripper, and it's naive to removing the hooks gently. There are some solutions that could be pursued on that front, some good ideas on doing that. It also might be simpler to chase a regulation proposal where if you're using the device, you bring in all the fish that you catch on it, just so you're not putting crumbs back in the water to keep the whales around you. So both of those are things that we're discussing. I'm going to try to get this one to run. So we did capture some footage of killer whales swimming around the ground line. This is about 500 feet deep. I don't know if you saw them near the end there. Where you want to really be looking is not at the marine snow, but it's at the lower right-hand quadrant in the dark area. Just keep an eye in that lower right-hand area. So they were checking out our gear. So this is an exterior camera where it's just looking there, and they do come by the gear. This is during daylight hours, so it's pretty dark down there, but they're actively around the gear. We have other, can't get it to go forward now. There we go. We have other footage that we can share during a coffee break, or maybe tomorrow during coffee break, particularly from the control camera. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on down there, and it's not necessarily informative to this study as we thought it would be for that part, but it's fascinating to think about some of those elements on what makes a fish chase bait, what is actually happening on the bottom, and some of the creatures that you forget are down there and messing around with the gear. So on the fishing tech side, some conclusions are that the shuttle can definitely be safely deployed and retrieved by vessels. This particular device is generally in need of a picking boom. They had that. The boat we tried it on in Al Pizarro's boat, the Pacific Surveyor, also had a nice picking boom. It's fairly, what's the word? It's not terribly heavy, but it's awkward. And so if you're in heavy seas, it can present somewhat of a danger. It has good retention of halibut. Simple modifications can increase our retention of smaller species that are of interest. Our next steps here are to find ways to foster this new device to reduce impacts on whale depredation, and we think those need to be investigated, and they could include a range of solutions here. One is things that do less damage to the fish, the weaker ganyons, softer hooks, or modified hooks, and there's ideas on that, but we would need, we were using halibut hooks. We were using 16-knot hooks on this study. On the pilot, we used sablefish hooks that were smaller, and we did that mid-pilot work so we could see the difference between the two. Excuse me. For smaller vessels, a collapsible design for safer stowage and transport and setting and hauling would probably be desirable. We've also discussed the idea of a regulatory change that would allow the use of the shuttle device, but maybe when you're using it, you have to retain those smaller fish and things like that. We've got enough data now that we've come up with a calculator that can show where that inflection point kind of is between if you have whales depredating this much versus you damage this many sublegals, what's the trade-off? And so we can incorporate that into the advice going forward coming out of this. The question is, are they back at the expo this year? I don't believe they are this year, but.
So there was a good, because on some of the film, you can see smaller fish going out, but it does retain sublegal fish.
It does, yeah. So it's able to retain sublegal fish, and sometimes it has to do with how they orient to that keyhole shape that they're coming through. The keyhole shape is designed to allow the ground line to go through, including when it has an occasional snarl. And there's that, it's like a long slit with a round spot at the bottom. Interestingly, we were seeing halibut tackle up and go right through that sometimes. They tended to be small, but the width of that gap can be altered. It's like in the production model, you kind of have it fixed, but you can change the width of that gap. The device also has holes along it in certain ways that tend to keep it oriented top up so that it goes down the ground line without colliding with the bottom. The size of those holes conceivably could allow certain size sablefish to go through. Certainly halibut can't get through those. One area though that we've seen problems with, including with halibut, is the tines on the front where they're coming through that spring-loaded tine gate. But again, those are easy solutions to fix. You can put more tines, you can put a crossbar on the tines. You're trying to let them flow into the device and have it snap back. So there's a variety of things that could be done there as well.
What diameter was their main line?
What diameter was the main line? It's in the bid specs, and I don't remember off the top of my head.
I was just curious. I mean, if you got away with, say, 3/8 or 3-strand, 4-strand.
Yeah, we were using thicker than 3/8, but they've used it with 3/8.
Oh, okay.
I want to say we were using 1/2 inch on this one. And that was partly because of the area we were going to. We didn't want to lose it during the study.
You were using 1/2 inch on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's stout stuff. What was the depth you guys were at?
So the depth ranged from 89 fathoms to 295, I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
We got chased north of the chain, south of the chain, up to the Aleutians, back down in the middle. We were running and bucking and playing with it in heavy seas, but yeah.
That's good. My experience, anything above 200 fathoms is pretty much fair game for the critters, as we call them. But yeah, great work.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're seeing more and more depredation out in the Western Gulf, and the Aleutians have been like this for a while. But with the pots and black cod, so this could be a potential solution. Yeah, they're ripping the slinky pots and the rigid pots apart. So
Yeah. So while we were there on our last day, we were communicating with another vessel on the ground that was black cod pot fishing. And they were getting the bottoms torn out of their pots the whole day prior to us getting on site and fishing in the presence of the same pod. But then we couldn't find halibut. So, but I can answer more questions at break or later in the discussion. I know we've gotten a bit behind time, so we should probably.
Yeah, I know. Because we're sure that the well depredation issue is an important one to discuss. So why don't we leave some of that discussion for later on, and we move on with the agenda. So thanks a lot, Claude. That was very interesting.
Okay, agenda item 5.2, we move on to our monitoring activities, which essentially relate around the fishery dependent and independent data. Now, I don't think we have a specific presentation for fishery dependent data, Basha, but is there anything in particular you just wanted to flag and have a general discussion about?
Nothing in particular. The latest data has been provided as a part of documentation for the interim meeting. So if anyone is interested in any details, that update includes currently projections through the end of the year. So we provide the kind of overview where we think the season will end in comparison to the fishery and mortality limits. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Nice and easy. Then we can move on to 522, which is the Fishery Independent Setline Survey update for 2025. And so Kayla has paper, I think it's 07 Rev 1. Is that correct, the latest? And I'll pass to you. Go for it. You should be able to access it direct from there. So if you, Secretariat, if you could just make Kayla a presenter, then she'll be able to navigate.
Okay. All right, let's see. So we're going to run through a brief reminder of the objectives of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. The primary objective of our FIS is standardized fishery independent data collection for the Pacific halibut stock assessment and the stock distribution estimation, Pacific halibut distribution and abundance trends, and the collection of biological data such as sex, maturity, and age. Both gear and bait are standardized on the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. Both fixed and snap gear vessels are eligible to bid each year, noting though that snap gear vessels did not participate in 2025 FIS. Each skate deployed for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey must meet the following specifications: 1,800 feet with 100 hooks spaced 18 feet apart. Number 3 circle hooks are threaded through the front on 24 to 48 inch ganyons, and 7 to 10 pound weights are used on each non-anchored skate end. In 2025, we resumed the use of just frozen chum salmon. No other bait type was used for this year. The frozen chum salmon was cut to 1/4 to 1/3 of a pound, and captains worked alongside our setline survey specialists to ensure that all bait met our quality standards, and captains signed off on those quality standards. The 2025 Fishery Independent Setline Survey was planned to consist of 515 stations. The survey ran from the 30th of May through the 5th of September. In comparison to those dates listed here in 2024, the 24th of May to the 15th of August, and in 2023, the 26th of May to the 1st of September. In 2025, we had 6 vessels participate in the FIS, in comparison to 5 vessels in 2024 and 8 vessels in 2023. As I stated, 515 stations were planned to be completed for the 2025 FIS this year, and 525 stations were planned for 2024, in comparison to 958 for 2023. In 2025, we had 22 ineffective stations per our normal trend. The majority of them were due to whale depredation. 10 stations deemed ineffective due to sperm whale, and 6 stations deemed ineffective to orca depredation. We also had 1 due to pinniped and 2 due to likely shark depredation. 1 sand flea station, and then 2 that we deemed gear issues. Those were generally, 1 was picked up over 24 hours. Actually, I want to say both of those were the same situation. One thing to note, though, is that we actually had more whale depredated ineffective stations in 3A this year in comparison to Area 4. This shows the trend dating back to 1998. That navy blue color is whale depredation. So generally speaking, as I stated, that's our highest percentage of ineffective stations year after year. And generally, when Area 4A is included in the sample design, we do see an increase in ineffective stations. But as I just noted, this year we actually had more whale depredated ineffective stations in 3A. And in total, we had 4.22% of our stations deemed ineffective. The secondary objective, as we highlighted earlier today, has been updated to state that the secondary objective is cost effectiveness without compromising the scientific integrity of the FIS design, which we strive to achieve this objective through our fish sale process, where a request for tender is announced for each sale, and all bids are rated against the specified criteria that are provided to all interested buyers on the sales notice. We've established the controls for the review and approval for each sale, and we also now complete multi-port bidding when feasible, which we did in 3A this year. Also, our charter agreements involve requests for tenders, and all submissions are rated against the same specified criteria that are published in our tender specifications. In addition, we do sell all sampled U32 Pacific halibut. In 2025, we saw that the price was approximately 26% less than our legal size 032 Pacific halibut price. And our tertiary objective is collaboration with various organizations. We do complete Pacific cod and spiny dogfish sampling coastwide in collaboration with NOAA Fisheries. This year, we collaborated with ADF&G for them to complete dockside rockfish sampling in Prince William Sound. We also complete 8 rockfish index stations and collaborate with WDFW, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, to complete dockside rockfish sampling in 2A Washington ports, as well as collaborating with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to complete dockside rockfish sampling. In years past, we've also done a collaboration in 2B to do dockside rockfish sampling with PHMA, Archipelago, and DFO. This has been on hold for a couple of years, but still having ongoing discussions. These links will provide access to IPHC's website with the 2025 FIS results. Now we'll go into some of the financial highlights. As we've all highlighted, this year we saw a significant increase in price, with our coastwide average jumping from 2024 at $6.22 a pound to 2025. Our coastwide average was $8.18, particularly noting that in 2B and 2C we saw nearly over $9.50 a pound. 2C was about $10 a pound, which was great, to say the least. And then in 4A, 3B and 4A, those were frozen markets, but even those were considerably higher as well. And this graphic shows the trends from 2000 to 2025, adjusted for inflation, just looking at the average price per pound. And you can see that the price in 2025 is back at right around post, like that first jump in 2021, where we were coming out of COVID and we saw a big increase in price. We're about that same spot there. So hopefully we'll stick around this price point. Yeah. All right. Some additional financial details comparing total sales in each regulatory area from 2024 to 2025. One thing to note is that the sales information in 2024 includes all of our standard FIS stations, but also includes those vessel captain stations that we did as well in 2024. So they had higher catch on those those off stations. So we did make some extra funds that weren't based on our standard FIS design. But 2025 coastwide, we had a total of $2,154,484. And then this just breaks this down a little bit even further, showing a rough station rate year to year, with last year in 2024, a total coastwide average at 3,999, and then a slightly higher average in 2025 at 4,088. However, if you want to look at some of the big jumps, let's see, 2024 2C, we had our average station rate was at like a little over 6,000 versus this year, our average station rate was over 13,000. So you can see that huge jump in price point. And with that, I will take questions. Yeah, Sean.
How do you feel your 4A, 4B survey went?
I think it went really well. I mean, for timing for 4A in particular, I mean, Lando's here. He can speak on his work in 4A, but I think 4A in particular went really well. I know Brian on the Polaris and 4B had quite an experience. There was some lost gear, but I mean, the work was completed, which is really great. That's the best case we can hope for. I know Area 4 is always kind of a troubling spot out there for us in the survey and just in general, but we got the work done and it went well overall. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Just checking to see if there's any questions online. Any other thoughts on the FIS activities this year? Any confirmation of FIS prices? It sounds like we did early on. Any other thoughts or feedback?
I guess one note, just to note, in 2C, we did sell all of our catch into Prince Rupert. So that's why the 2B and 2C prices are so comparable.
Okay. Yeah.
Kayla, I mean, generally overall, what you're projected, I mean, I know your money was up slightly more than 2024, but your projected catch rate as a general across the board, not region by region, but was that up or no?
I always hesitate to talk about catch rates on my own because I think that Ray and Ian speak on it so much better. But
You projected
right.
a certain amount and versus what was actually.
I want to
cost.
say our coastwide, like if you look at it coastwide, just total, like across the board, I want to say it was at like 80 some odd % of what we predicted. But then there were certain reg areas that we saw more than what we predicted. I actually took that slide out of this presentation because it does raise more questions because I tend to look at just the raw catch projections and it isn't as clear as Ian and Ray speak to, but yeah, I'll kind of let them answer that better. Yeah.
So with that then, let's have Ray come on up and you can present. So you had the next presentation for paper 08, please.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully this is a short presentation too. Talking about the designs, Kayla's talked about the design we implemented in 2025, and This will focus on the design, particularly that we're preparing for 2026, with some options that we're considering or are under consideration by the commission, and will be hopefully approved at the interim meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. And I gotta do this. Okay, as short a background as I can. You know a lot about the FIS already, but the most important data source on halibut gives us our indices of abundance and estimates of stock distribution, biological data for the assessment. We've undertaken one annually since 1993 with a couple of periods of expansion. Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't need, yeah, you're right. Thanks. Over that time. This is the full FIS grid with the orange circles representing the 10 by 10 nautical mile grid. And the data from FIS is typically supplemented in the Bering Sea with data from the NOAA Troll Survey there, and sometimes the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Troll Survey as well, although the latter wasn't fished this year. You've already seen this, the objectives and design layer, so I'm just going to skip over that. A little bit of more recent history to show how we got to where we are. After the last series of expansions of the grid, finishing in 2019, we developed rationalized FIS designs with random sampling in the core areas and sampling of blocks of stations elsewhere, prioritized to maintain precise estimates with low bias. And but due to COVID-19, the FIS was reduced only to the core areas in 2020. In 2021 and 2022, the proposed designs were largely implemented, although we couldn't sample Western 4B due to lack of viable bids, the R2 region. Over the last 3 years, we've had reduced designs to implement it to lower costs. So little sampling outside of the core areas in 2023, with no sampling in 4A, 4B, or 4CD that year. Further reductions in 3A and 3B in 24, but some sampling in 4CD. And 2025 sampling in 3A, 3B to complement the 2023-24 sampling. So focusing on parts of the habitat that we weren't able to sample in the prior years, and sampling high density parts of 2A and some sampling, as you've seen, in 4A and 4B for the first time since 2022. And this was a figure that was requested by RAB members last year. So we produced that pretty much right away, and it was shown, I think, at the interim meeting last year. And this is showing the most recent sampling year by station. And the brighter the color, the more recently it was sampled. So the yellow stations were sampled effectively by the FIS this year. And then as we move into orange, they were sampled last year, most recently, and darker orange 2 years ago. And then the darkest colors are 5 or more years, or 4 more, 5 or more years ago. So we can see large parts of the stock have been sampled relatively recently, but also large parts of the stock haven't been sampled for a number of years. That includes parts of 3A, but more particularly 4A, 4B, and large parts of 2A. So generally when we're trying to come up with designs for coming years, we'd like to prioritize some of the areas that we haven't been able to sample in recent years. And but not everything is, of course, possible. Some of those areas that we haven't sampled because of logistical reasons or cost reasons and limited budgets. This was the implemented 2025 design. Kayla's already shown this figure, although there may be some subtle differences. I will point out this area here in Eastern 4B, we had initially approved this cluster of 15 stations in the far east of 4B, but those were not considered logistically feasible by our the charter operator, and so those were switched with 15 substitute stations in the western part of the sampled area here. And likewise, this design in 4A was negotiated with Lando in order to fish stations that he considered viable. For fishing, initially the design was more of a contiguous set of stations, including all the stations in the west. And this is the implemented design. Otherwise, there are a few ineffective stations scattered around in the darker circles. You can see in 3A, as Kayla highlighted, well, depredation and other issues. But by and large, we fished what we intended to. So for coming years, we are, as we have in the last year or two, we're focusing on what we call a base block design, which is our, in terms of science and logistics, our optimal design. And we've evaluated that for the commission. We look 3 years out ahead, although I have designs for 5 years out ahead. Prioritizes some annual sampling in each biological region for stock assessment purposes, and ensures all charter regions in the core of the stock are sampled over a 3-year period. So we're doing complete sampling of the core of the stock, not each year, but over a 3-year period, rotating the areas that we sample over that period. And coverages in other areas are prioritized, as I mentioned before, to minimize bias potential and maintain relatively precise estimates. And the sample blocks in the core, as I mentioned, rotated over time. And it is considered the optimal long-term design in terms of balancing scientific needs and cost effectiveness. And for the rest of this presentation, we'll also refer to this as option 1, which is the design we'd like to implement if we had the resources to do so in 2026. And this is what it looks like for the next 3 years. So 2026, we're striving in this design to again choose parts of the stock in the core areas 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B that were complementary to what we sampled in 2025 and earlier years. So these are not charter regions that we fished last year. Likewise, in 2C, we're trying to fish 2 out of 3 regions. So we did fish the central region, which is Omni, and but we've added kits of that for 2026. And the part of 4A where we're targeting here is the southeast. Not so challenging in terms of logistics and tides and weather conditions, but we haven't sampled it since 2019. So it's a higher priority for that reason. 4B, although we haven't sampled R2 for quite some time, we are targeting this larger region here. We sampled 30 stations, part of that. But this is the full part of 4B that we've been wanting to sample. Is the highest density part of 4B, so it's our priority for 2026, given that we haven't sampled much of this since, for a number of years. But I'll highlight, it's hard to see so far away, but if you were on your computers and you could zoom in, these little these slightly darker shaded regions, which we call optional. I noted those before. Those are the 15 stations that were considered logistically difficult for sampling. With the right vessel and the right conditions, we'd still like to be able to sample those, but for bid purposes, we're proposing those as optional in 2026 to not deter potential bidders. 2027, moving into areas, again, complementary. We're prioritizing R2 and 4B. And no need for sampling in 4A. And again, at 2026, we don't have any sampling proposed in 2A. It's an area that it's relatively low proportion of the stock as a whole and as part of Region 2B, Region 2, sorry, and for assessment or stock distribution and so on. Index estimation purposes, it's not necessary to sample it every year. That doesn't mean there aren't reasons that the Commission might not prioritize that regardless. But we have it planned for sampling in 2027 and 2028 and different parts of that. And our focus at the moment is on 2026. So we evaluated the cost of the 2026 design option and we optimized it for number of skates. More expensive areas, we'll fish fewer skates. Those areas that make us money, we'd like to fish the most number of skates possible. And we're assuming that Pacific halibut price declines by 10% from 2025. It was up around 30% from 2024. So this is not a completely pessimistic assessment of price. We're building in a little bit of decline, but commissioners have I think, asked us not to be too pessimistic. So we're going for a 10% decline. Hopefully that's realistic. A decline of landings of 5%, which is also fairly consistent with what we've seen in recent years. And the price of the baits increasing to $2.50 a pound from $1.65 a pound in 2025. And our revenue projections also include the $513,000 voluntary contribution that I think Dave highlighted earlier from the US towards the survey, which really has helped in allowing us to have a greater footprint than we otherwise would have. So this is the base block design you just saw, and we called it option 1, as I mentioned, and its projected net revenue, including that voluntary contribution, is actually a loss of $1.155 million US. That is not a viable option due to that large loss. So we're exploring other options, and our option 2 is the supplemented reduced loss design, supplemented by that voluntary contribution, but with stations and chosen and charter regions chosen to reduce the loss to a level that's more manageable. So this would have a projected net operating loss of close to $0.5 million, so less than half the loss of the base block design. Again, with revenue supplemented, and it differs from the base block design option 1 as follows. It replaces one revenue negative charter region in 2B with 2 regions predicted to be revenue positive. So even though that revenue negative region, which happens to be Goose Island for those familiar, in 2B was a high priority because we haven't sampled it for a couple of years. In order to maximize the amount of sampling we can do, we can get 2 regions instead of 1 region, even though they're regions we've done more recently. Adds 1 revenue positive region to 2C, which means we're sampling, I think, the entirety of 2C, and replaces 3 high cost regions in 3A with 2 regions that ensure projected overall losses are maintained close to that 0.5 million. So while we had higher priority regions in 3A we wanted the sample, we're scaling that back and reducing the loss by sampling elsewhere. And 1 fewer charter region in 3B, whereas base block design had 2, there's only 1 charter region, though it is a priority region for us. So that supplemented reduced loss design looks like this. It's still quite a especially extensive footprint. There are greater gaps in some parts of the stock, particularly 3B, but we're still preserving sampling in 4A and 4B, which is a priority for the use of that supplemental funding by the Commission, and still sampling some priority areas in 3B, 2B, and elsewhere that would otherwise that on their own would lose money. And again, we anticipate our data will be complemented by some kind of NOAA troll survey in the Bering Sea. So in terms of number of stations, those are very similar designs, close to 700 stations each, if I remember correctly. So similar number of fish stations to the base block design, prioritizes some regions that have been fished recently over others that were included in the base block design because they lacked recent sampling. This helps ensure that we meet our cost effectiveness goal. It does reduce coverage in region 3 over the 2025-26 period, increasing the chance of bias in estimates for that region. Nevertheless, option 2 represents a substantial improvement in coverage over the 2025 design and complements that design by including 7 charter regions that were not sampled this year, 2 each in 2B and 2C, 1 each in 3A and 3B, and 1 in 4A, but also including a number of stations in 4B that have not been sampled for a number of years. So compared with the last 2 years, this design will result in more representative biological data, more precise indices of abundance and stock distribution, and an assessment model that's less reliant on the commercial data than it has been in the last couple of years. Now, to give the Commission some more options to consider, we've produced a list of modular design changes that are intermediate between options 1 and 2 in terms of cost. So if additional funding could be allocated, these could be considered. So, and we've also got a series of modular options that would expand FIS coverage beyond the footprint of either of those options. And they will be also presented to the Commission at the interim meeting. And those options include IPHC Regulatory Area 2A, in case that becomes a priority for the Commission. It's not otherwise part of either option 1 or option 2. And I'll note that there were lower observed levels of dissolved oxygen in that we found on our survey in 2A in 2025. So that's become a point of discussion at the Commission level. The question is, with this lower levels of dissolved oxygen, does that affect the survey that we saw? Is it a representative survey, what we might typically see otherwise? Maybe there'd be a desire to resample in 2026 in order to get data in a year that's less affected by that. And on that subject, so this is these are maps of dissolved oxygen level. The bright lights, it may be a bit hard to see some of the subtle colors. Hopefully you can, if you've got laptops or devices, you might be able to see them more clearly, but otherwise the presentation is online. These are maps showing dissolved oxygen in 2A in 2025 and the areas that we've sampled, along with overlaying the raw catch rates of 032 weight per unit effort on top of that. Our research in the past, recent past, has shown that we will get non-zero catch rates of halibut, reasonable catch rates of halibut, if dissolved oxygen is above 0.9 milliliters per liter. And we've highlighted, it's very hard for me to see, spots where that is below that level, that threshold, in both Washington and Oregon. The largest one is, I believe, is here. If you can see a dashed white line around, is it around here? This dark region here, where we basically had, if I'm telling me somebody, very hard for me to see it, but if I'm getting it wrong, tell me. Where we had basically no fish caught and levels of dissolved oxygen in which we'd expect no fish to be caught. A couple of other single station spots around, and I think there's something else up here in Washington as well. I can't see it at all. Maybe here. Anyway, those are areas that we also, but yeah, but here's the comparison with the last time we had an extensive survey in 2A in 2022. Much higher levels of dissolved oxygen across the board, but most importantly, no areas at all of hypoxia in 2022. So, but even at these levels of oxygen, we're still expecting decent catch rates of halibut, and we did see some good station catches in parts of 2A this year. So the question is this still a representative of what we might expect? Have the fish moved elsewhere into places we didn't sample? And so we're missing them in our survey, which is now more fragmented than it used to be. We used to be able to argue that, well, these fish, if they can move away from the dissolved oxygen, they've gone somewhere else, so our survey will pick them up somewhere. It's possible that we may have missed them if they've moved into southern 2B or elsewhere in 2A. But it's worth noting that this is the 030, I think it's 032 catch rate for time series for 2A and shows a 10% decline in the 2025 value from 2024. But that's also true in 2B and 2C, which experienced similar declines in catch rate. So we have a consistent decline in catch rate over the entirety of region 2. And so in this case, what we saw and what we were able to see in 2A in 2025 was not inconsistent, low dissolved oxygen or not. And there was not evidence of any significant levels of decreases in dissolved oxygen outside of 2A this year. So No, it could be argued that trends we're estimating in 2A are they're consistent with what we've seen elsewhere in 2B. It's quite possible that hypoxia did not have a meaningful effect on the catch rates that we saw this year. That is something that no doubt will receive much discussion by the Commission, but we're certainly interested in your thoughts on that issue as well. And let's see if I have anything else. Okay. Other things I'd like to highlight, and for those who have fished in 4A and 4B and would consider bidding or have advice on those who might want to bid, this issue of having stations that are more challenging to fish. Those stations are actually quite desirable for us to get data on because they are some of the highest density stations, but we understand that they are much more challenging in terms of tide and weather, and which is why the design was the way it was this year, and why. With they have been fished before, and Orlando, you fished 4B in 2017 successfully, I believe.
Desirable because they have what? More
Well,
fish on them?
so if we don't fish those stations, they have the highest catch rate. In recent history, they have the highest catch rates in either of those two regulatory areas. And so if we don't fish those stations, a lot of them weren't fished in the past prior to the expansion. It ended up building a negative bias into the estimates that of the indices that we got. And while we can, the modeling we do, it can use data from the recent past to fill in those gaps. That benefit fades away with time. And so over time, if we continue not to fish those stations, then but nevertheless, the underlying density is quite high, then we will be underestimating the indices for those areas. So for that perspective, we want to get data from those stations, but we understand that it's logistically challenging to do so. So any advice or suggestions to help sample them. We don't need them every year, but to work ways of getting some or all of them when they're planned for sampling.
You know, a lot of them weren't even fished before the expansion years, though, right?
They were not. A lot of them were not, and that's probably why. Is because at the time I don't have the notes for why they designed the way they designed, but it looks like based on the stations you didn't want to do this year, that they coincided with a lot of the stations that were not fished prior to 2014 in 4A. And so they were probably omitted for similar reasons, and that they were considered, the tides and so on were considered too difficult to fish those stations. But people have managed it. We've lost a fair amount of gear in 4A.
Yeah, so there's that trade-off. So how many times have they been fished successfully, and how many times where they were not successful? But you don't really have that data going back because you didn't fish them before the expansion.
No, sorry. We are putting together a briefing note on lost gear, and we lose the greatest proportion of gear at those stations, and they have only been fished, as you say, like it's probably no more than 3 or 4 times, some of them, and some of those weren't effective sets for those reasons, lost gear or tides making the soak times too long and so on. Yeah, so they are challenging, but I know you had quite a constrained fishing window this year. There wasn't a lot of flexibility. You couldn't wait it out and come back to them. So we ended up moving 6 more stations to somewhere else. And in a maybe a more complete design or without those constraints, the timing could be shifted in order to fish them at the most optimal window.
Yeah. If they were done earlier, and you say you could always revisit them in a month or so. But there's not a lot of windows all year long out there. So if you miss the best one there is, then you're just, anyway. But I was going to ask you, not to bemoan this too long, but so I appreciate your flexibility of the 4A region and how we dealt with that this year. So were you surprised? And I don't really fully understand the whole bias thing. If you move them around and you cherry pick and stuff, you create more bias. But were you were you encouraged or were you happy with the stations you chose to replace the ones that were undoable?
So the 6, you mean, that we changed partway through the season? Yeah. Yeah, I think that worked quite well. The ones that we had were in that higher density area, but given that that was not possible, the 6 that we ended up replacing them with, I mean, we had a little bit of a back and forth, but I think the ones that we picked were complemented. There was a little area that we wouldn't have otherwise fished, and we had good catch rate, I think, there as well. So they provided information that was otherwise would have been missing. Yeah, so it was not a loss of information. It was just a shift in information.
But was there more bias in that design than the one that you had?
So the one that we originally had didn't have gaps, right? So so the design that was approved by the commission was a contiguous block of stations right up to the 4B border and actually over into the 4B border. And so when I've looked at maps of old catch rates overlaying the stations that we agreed with you, and then the ones that were shifted subsequent partway through the survey. And we certainly left out the highest catch rate stations from the recent past. Those were the stations that when the survey was done successfully at those stations in 2014 and 21 and 22 had the highest catch rates. So when we talk about bias, if we were to just take the raw catch rates and not worry about modeling or anything, we would have expected, we got very good catch rates in 4A relative to what we were expecting. And he's mentioned a lot of small fish too, and but higher catch rates overall. We would have expected even higher catch rates at those stations that we didn't fish. Had they been logistically feasible to fish, we might have gone there and lost all that gear as well. But yeah, I know exactly. So this is what we're doing here. We're balancing the 2 priorities: the scientific needs with the cost effectiveness, and the design we ended up was a compromise. We got data that we might not have got if we'd insisted on fishing those stations, because you may not have wanted a bid on that design. So it was certainly great that we were able to come to an agreement, but something is lost by not being able to fish those stations as well. But that's, yeah, sorry? Theoretically, something is lost by not being able to get data at those stations, yeah. We could fish them and not get any data.
When you talk about the bias, if you don't have a continuous footprint, if you block it out in different regions or different parts of that charter area, that creates bias? Is that what you're saying?
If we are, say, consistently choosing stations that have higher or lower density than the average, then that creates a bias. So what we did this year was, at least based on the data we've had in the past, we had a set of stations that had lower catch rates than the complete footprint for that part of 4A.
Oh, okay. I get it now.
Yeah. So if we're able to do them every now and then, the modeling will allow us to fill in the gaps when we're not doing it. But if we never do it again, never do those high density stations again, then eventually the indices for 4A will be too low. And also the trend might be off. If there's something different going on in this habitat than elsewhere, we might not fully understand the trend. So one thing for discussion is having a set of optional stations as part of the bid. Is that a nice workaround that makes this process more appealing? What's that? Most definitely, yeah. So, I mean, with your work this year and with Brian's work, I think and with other recent sampling, it's not hard to work out which stations we can set as optional, but still desirable for fishing.
I've got a question. Can we go back to the slides that show the charter areas in Alaska. These ones, yeah. When we get to the meetings in January, there's going to be a pretty hot topic about how much of these areas are chosen for economic considerations and how many of them are chosen for scientific stock assessment, especially since we're cutting the charters way back from where they used to be. Do we have a answer for that? You were there.
Yes. Sorry for those online. I thought I had extra slides and it says there are 21 slides, but I can't access them. Those slides are, I think, in the, at least one of them is in the report. The others are in the interim meeting document, which shows the cost of each of the regions. So the base block design is basically the science priority design. The supplemented reduced loss design includes compromises for cost effectiveness. And so what we've done is we've shifted some regions that are higher scientific priority to others that were a lower scientific priority, but were more cost effective. And I think it amounts to, I don't know, 3 or 4 regions that may have been switched in particularly in areas, in area 3A and 2B and 2C. So yes, there are regions that have been added into the design because we make money, and there are regions that have been taken out because they would lose us more money in order to meet the cost effectiveness goal.
I,
That's true. I do list it.
yeah.
In words, but there was supposed to be there was a table at some point where, thank you. Oh, it's up there. Yeah.
Anyways, I understand it. I think we all understand fundamentally there's a pretty heavy weight of the charters over the last few years in 2A and 2B and 2C, right? So it's something that we're going to be called on to defend. It's going to be a hot topic. It's going to be a potential conflict between Canada and the US. And I'm not asking, I know you've just described that there has been some bias for that. It's going to get drilled into pretty hard in those meetings, so we might as well talk about it right now.
What, the Canadians gonna make a fuss or what?
Canadians making
It does seem like there's less going on down there survey wise, but, like you said here, they're getting better data, right? By this design.
We're getting more data more data, and we can afford to do it. So, in 2B, replacing one revenue negative charter region, which was Goose Island, with 2 regions projected to be revenue positive, which is Charlotte and St. James in the north. We have fished Charlotte in 2025. It wasn't a high priority, but it's a large region, almost 90 stations, and so the data are going to be very helpful in understanding the trends in 2B. So it's not like we don't need these data, but we get 2 regions instead of 1. It's a balancing of priorities. In 2B and 2C, sorry, we're adding Ketchikan, which, if I had the table, would add only $2,000 more. So, you can argue, should we not do that? That's a choice for the commission. If you take away Ketchikan, we're projected to lose just $2,000. The others are, the differences are much larger. And likewise 3A, maybe less discussion there because we're not fully sampling it or adding a lot extra, but in fact, we're reducing the footprint. But still getting a good amount of coverage with this supplemented reduced loss design.
To be clear on this design, you're going to 3A charter regions, the same ones as 2A this year?
Yeah, so we made money. Oh, no, sorry, did we make money? Well, Yakutat and Prince William Sound did quite well this year. Higher catch rates, good prices, they did quite well. And so this design, I believe, let me check, gone through a few iterations. This design includes Prince William Sound and Yakutat again. It also includes Seward, which we haven't fished for a couple of years. We would have prioritized Fairweather and Core Point as well, but they would have lost us a fair bit more money. They were projected to lose us a fair bit more money. So we still get 3 charter regions. The base block design had 4, but this keeps us within the range of losses that we can manage.
Yeah, so just to address Bruce's perspective there. So from what you're hearing, we're not sampling, they're not sampling enough in 2C and in 2B?
No, I actually don't even agree with the adversarial talk we're going to get in December. In
Oh, you don't
January.
agree
But-
with what's going to happen is what
But
you're saying.
I know what's talked out there. You get this is going to fuel the Canada versus US stuff, which is actually kind of calming down in the last couple of years. But, in one side, you get them saying, well, only 18% of the fish comes from Canada and they want 50% vote. And then you're going to say, yeah, but 50% of the revenue for fish comes out of Canadian fish, right? Why do you keep hammering Canada when it's not biology? It's economic, right? And that's the argument that's going to be in the room when we get there. And we all know that in the last 2 or 3 years, we have weighted it towards economics. And I agree that we should, but it's going to be the elephant in the room when we're talking about it for sure. I don't disagree with it at all. I'm just bringing it up. It's a thing, and it's sort of a thing we don't talk about much. We've got the captain stations, and we've got, some of these things that are just to generate revenue only. And somehow we're going to have to weave it into how we manage the fishery to raise money. It hasn't been that way before because it's kind of been blended into science, right? But it's becoming a thing. That's all I meant, Rando.
Yeah, and I think, they're very, very valid points, and the discussion, as you said, is going to occur at the upcoming interim meeting, but then also the annual meeting itself. Well, one of the key things is to think about sort of the long-term data needs for the Commission for the stock assessment through the FIS. And yes, we may well put in stations that aren't immediately necessary for the next stock assessment, but they will pay for the stations in future years to get that data to undertake the stock assessment we need to. And so it's very easy to be distracted from the year by year changes where we do add in areas that are more profitable. But they will pay for areas, including in 2B, that weren't profitable last year. And this year they are because of the increase in fish price. And that fish price may not last for more than another year. And so I guess it was just a point not to be distracted by the immediate short-term extra stations that are fished versus the longer-term needs of creating a revenue base, a reserve, so that we can go into these strongly revenue negative areas. And both the US and Canada, and the US this year has put over $500,000 in to try and offset those costs. And I don't think Canada will. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But just given the current budget scenario. And so there is a recognition from the US that they should put in additional funding for the Fishery Independence Headline Survey in those data poor areas in US waters. They're certainly pushing Canada to contribute, but there is, in my opinion, an understanding that it doesn't need to be on the same magnitude.
Yeah, again, I'm not being adversarial on this. I'm just talking about
Well, you,
something we're gonna be talking about. That's,
years ago, I was sitting here when we expanded the surveys too, and it was a pretty sizable expansion. A lot of it was generated around 4A, 4B because of, I fished turbot out there for years, and we were seeing halibut all of a sudden show up on the grounds in the deep water that were never there. And so and we weren't, I'd say as a industry at the table, we were probably not in favor of expanding the survey because of gear loss and problems in those areas that, as fishermen, we knew were going to be dealt with. But also when they did that, they expanded quite a bit of 3A, 3B, and also southeastern Canada. And so I've thought ever since then, especially the last 4 or 5 years, I've thought, well, what would have happened if we'd never expanded in the first place? We might have been better off. And that was, as I recall, that was even talked about, but it happened. And I don't know, I still think it was probably a mistake to expand. But
Every time we expanded the survey somewhere, we learned something new. And I'm all for improving our knowledge and understanding of the stock.
I think one speaking point that might get lost sometimes in the discussions about the survey is that there's a lot of focus on which areas are getting fished and which aren't. And I think it's important to remember that when we go through this process of rationalizing and trying to squeeze the most information we can out by sometimes adding areas or subtracting areas or switching areas to get the best footprint we can get for the dollars that we have available, that benefits everybody. So even if the charter region that gets added might be in a charter region out here versus over here, everybody's depending on the quality of that coast-wide index. And so where the specific charter region that gets fished is really a secondary question, and the quality of the overall survey, I think, is the real takeaway. So I know there's been discussions in the past about, well, you know, we're using this area to pay to sample that area, but all those areas combined are what creates the quality of the index. And if we're missing big sections out west, it's going to hurt everybody, including people on the east side of the stock, because we're going to get the overall trend wrong.
If there's no other questions online or in the room on the survey, we can let Ray go. He's escaped already. Thanks, Ray. I would suggest we take a short break and then reconvene and have a bit more of a discussion about some of the research projects and avenues that we can go down, and Giuseppe can help us out with that. So let's break for 15 minutes and then come back and have a discussion before we wrap up and head to the brewery. Thanks. Let's reconvene. So we have about an hour before we're going to break for the function this evening, which is a short walk away, and Giuseppe's going to walk us through that in just a moment. And then we're going to move on to this afternoon, just a general free-flowing discussion. Giuseppe has a approximate agenda set up in terms of the core topics he and his team would like some input on, just in terms of guidance on and discussion of other potential applied research projects. So we're hoping to wrap up at about 4:15 or so, which gives us an opportunity to close here and then walk up the road. And I'll pass to Giuseppe just to walk through those details.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Let me share my screen because we're going to have, as Dave mentioned, social right after the termination of today's discussion. So let me share my screen to let you know where this location is. No, share. 7-Eleven.
Budget.
Okay. Yeah.
So 1,000 miles on the beer.
So this is, can't see. Where's this?
Maybe start by filling the screen and then.
Yeah. Yeah, here we go. So we're gonna have the social in this place here. It's called Bizarre Brewing. The address is 4441 26th Avenue West. This is barely 3 blocks away from where we are. So here's the IPHC building. We're on the 3rd floor. This is the walking route. So you're going west on West Commodore, and then you make a left on 26th Avenue, and it's basically the 2nd block on the right-hand side. That red dot indicates where the brewery is. So it's very close. There's, for those of you driving, there's parking on the street as well. We can go there anytime after 4:15, after 4:30. There's going to be catering after 5 p.m. That's taken care of by the IPHC. Unfortunately, drinks are not. This place will be open. Yeah, we wish, but we can't. So anyway, it's Bizarre Brewing, 26th Avenue West. It's on the right-hand side as you go up the street. It's kind of a nice place, and it's a perfect place for, just mingling around and continuing our discussion and just chit chat a little bit more. So, thank you. Now entering the general discussion area, and we have 2 portions of time dedicated for feedback from the Research Advisory Board onto everything that we presented today and additional items. I think a number of items were brought up today that deserve some continuated discussion. So we have, as we said, we have about an hour and 15 minutes today, and then we have additional time tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning we have about an hour and 15 minutes for the continuation of the guidance and discussion section, and about an hour and a half basically, and then we have the review of the draft and adoption of the draft before we break before lunch. Maybe we could start by if anybody has additional questions regarding what was presented today before we go on specific topics. Are there any questions that any of the RAB members, both in present or online, have about the specific items that were presented today? Both from the biology and the monitoring side? Yeah, Scott,
thanks.
and then Lando.
A couple things, like on our last meeting, there was discussion about using AI to looking at otolith and aging them, and I'm just curious about how that is progressing.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So we made quite of a progress as we move towards the last SRB in June. So the most up-to-date progress report would be the SRB document. But what we've been trying to work for is, first of all, we are increasing our sample size. So we've been working really hard on adding additional pictures to our collection so that we can build a more accurate model with more training data. And we've been really fortunate. We have recently a couple of volunteers helping us with taking additional pictures. So we're increasing the sample size pretty rapidly over the last 2-3 months. Other than that, we've been working on a couple of other improvements to the model, looking at things like increasing the model accuracy, but what's called fine tuning. So trying to build a general model and then retrain it for specific years so that it's improving the predictions for the current data collections. Thinking really about building a model that is well integrating two data sources. So this automatic AI type of model age predictions with overseeing and supplementary aging by human readers. So these are the few developments, but we're planning to now continue just taking additional images and with a really focus on making sure we have a well-represented, especially older Pacific halibut in the data collection, because previously we've been getting a bias in predictions for older ages, and this is very likely just because as we're taking kind of across pictures one by one to get to older Pacific halibut. They're not that common, so these were definitely underrepresented in the sample. So focusing on that, making sure we are fully representing the whole cross section of IPHC regulatory areas, not to focus the model on one area, but make sure it's predicting well in multiple areas, and building into the model also understanding of confidence intervals, so accuracy of predictions. And what we've seen that if you train what is called deep ensemble, so you train multiple models on the same images, but with a different starting point, you will get somewhat like a different range of results for each individual model. And based on that, you can designate otoliths that are, according to the model, accurately predicted, or the images that the model is struggling with. And these can be sent for manual reading as needed, so you can combine these methods. And this is substantially improving our current results. But I don't have a full kind of paper update at this time, because at the moment we're just focusing now on seeing what will be what are the differences and improvements as we add considerable number of new images. What we've seen is that as we move to a more advanced type of models, the number of images I have previously, they were just not enough. If actually the simple models perform best at that number of images we had. So we are now working towards increasing that training sample, seeing what are the additional improvements, but potentially also looking into applying more advanced models. But as I said, at last time I was trying, we just did not have enough training data to use really advanced models. So it's still subject to further research and further assessment whether it's something that we can move forward with. And this is relating also to what the SRB was saying, looking at the cost-benefit analysis. Where is it actually worth to using AI, and whether we are at what point we are getting sufficient results using or accurate enough results using this method, and how this method can be used to supplement the current manual otolith aging. So that's kind of general update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, appreciate the update. Thanks.
Oh, how do we know that the manual method actually is accurate? Does somebody check the human counters to make sure they didn't count it right? And then a third one check that one to make sure the second counter was, how's that work?
So a couple of things. So we definitely verified that using the break and baked otoliths is an unbiased method. There have been a number of experiments using what is the radioactive, based on the bombing experiments to detect the actual, whether the number of rings between it's accurate. There was at some point also an experiment when they were injecting Pacific halibut with some sort of, I won't tell you exactly the name of the chemical, but it would glow in the dark, and they would be when they had the tag Pacific halibut that was known to be injected with that chemical, they would verify that the actual aging is accurate. So we do know that in general the method for manual aging is unbiased. Obviously it's not 100% accurate. You will have the difference between the readers, and if they are read now across time, there are some differences. We do every year read at least 10% of the otoliths twice and verify the age to make sure that that there's a quality control. If one person is deviating too much or there are some differences. We do re-age some of these otoliths as needed, especially for not only for the general stock assessment, but if there are otoliths and age is used for more for some of the studies that require more accurate aging. So for I think the maturity study, the otoliths were aged additional time just to verify and make sure that the result ages match between the readers that we have. So obviously the training data that goes, for example, to AI might not necessarily be 100% accurate. Some of the testing I'm currently doing is also I'm assigning higher weight to otoliths that have been read twice versus those that have been read just once to allow the model to be trained more strongly on otoliths that we think they are more accurately aged just because they've been to at least 2 pair of eyes versus 1. So that's one way to at least utilize that information. So there's a number of aspects to accuracy and bias of the otolith, but in general, we believe that it's a well researched and well established method that in training provides maybe there will be still confidence interval for manual age, but it's in general unbiased and accurate method.
Any other questions on this alternative aging method? I think Lando had a question before.
What?
I thought you had a question before.
Oh, wow, that was a long time ago. Yeah, I can't remember. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I just wanted to applaud the commission and Claude and whoever else was on that team of pursuing doggedly that depredation study with the shuttle or whatever it's called. Whale predation is just getting worse and worse and worse. They're just becoming more and more of an issue for everybody everywhere. And the slinky pots was a good fix, or at least temporarily, for the black cod fishery. But we're seeing what's happening out west. And it seems like that group of orcas out there, they're like the trendsetters or the brains of the whole fleet or something, because they're did you see the footage from
I looked at it.
yeah, right, exactly. That 4A pod is the most aggressive pod that ever existed. They just charge your boat and jump out of the water and bite you in the ass and everything else. So anyway, that's a really good study, and I think we should applaud them for getting it done. I know you had a really hard time finding vessels to do it. It's been done. It proved successful. It's going to need some modifications, especially for smaller boats. But I think, as far as what we've tried so far, and it has applications in the black cod fishery too, scale the size or modifying the design or whatnot. So, I'm just really glad that got done, and then we're still looking at tweaking it to make it work.
Yeah, I think that's one thing about this, it never quits. So there's always something we got to work on. And I mean, there's guys that have even taken 8x crab pots, 800 pounders, and added all kinds of iron to them, trying to protect the web. And those whales go right through it. But I remember 40 years or so ago that we used to think they were cute, and would actually literally, they would stand vertical and would drop heads right in their mouth with our hand. And
Yeah.
it wasn't just me, but yeah, we thought it was cute.
All that research, you've only figured out the problem.
Yeah. Well, what's been amazing about it is I've watched them. We were off Akutan one time and we're fishing turbot. They were letting the halibut come through and the black cod and just taking the turbot. So, and it was good halibut fishing too. So I went back there a couple weeks later to catch halibut, and they took the halibut and let the turbot come through. They know what we want, and they go for it. But anyway, no, But the whole research and development thing is just an ongoing thing and never quits. And that's why I'm glad to see, you know, science as well as industry work together on that. But I had a question too, talking about the younger females. And it was fascinating to me to see that graph making them, they're a little bit younger now, reaching reproductive maturity. But, and I think I heard someone say something that was there something wrong with that? But to me, that's not wrong. I don't think it's wrong, I don't think. But I don't know, I was just kind of looking for more feedback on that one.
No, I don't think it's necessarily wrong. It is the kind of response that we'd expect to see. When we fish a stock, you know, if there's fewer older fish around, you'd expect the younger ones to start to mature a little bit earlier. It is potentially indicative of fishing pressure or change in age structure, whether that's caused mainly by fishing or by recruitment dynamics. But no, it's a natural response. I guess the questions are then the cascade of questions include things like, well, do those younger females have the same kind of egg output and egg quality? Are we, you know, does it take more of them to produce the same amount for the next year class? And I guess, you know, one thing to think about when we start getting to the next tier, which is egg quality and survival, is for that to matter, we need to know where the bottleneck is. So if the bottleneck is in terms of eggs surviving the 3 to 6 month window in the pelagic zone and settling out, then the quality of the egg really matters. But if the bottleneck is whether the current's going clockwise and sending those eggs to Hawaii, or whether it's going counterclockwise and sending them west of Kodiak and into the Bering Sea, it really doesn't matter whether they're great eggs or terrible eggs. If they're going to Hawaii, they're not going to produce anything for us. Similarly, there could be a bottleneck at the settlement phase. And so understanding the relative importance of those different early life history phases becomes really important to interpret whether having a big oil globule in the egg is necessarily a winning, you know, the thing we need, or whether that's, you know, a good thing, not a bad thing, but maybe it's not what's making or breaking a good year class. So we're picking off, and we kind of talked about this tiers of questions. We're picking off the really big important ones. We're also kind of picking off the simpler ones. And the farther down the list we go, the more complicated it gets to interpret the results. But I actually would say, in terms of the change from 11 to 9, there's going to be variability year to year and cohort to cohort. And to me, I'm less concerned about temporal and spatial variability at the moment, and just saying, look, hey, now we have a good estimate on average of where these things are maturing, because a year or two here and there isn't going to make a huge difference. If we start monitoring it and we see a 10 or 20 year trend, that's going to be a bigger difference, I think. But
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's more of a trend, but also the other thing and we haven't talked about either was maybe maturations earlier due to better food source or whatever too, maybe, I don't know. But
yeah,
that's
I'll just say that, you know, over our 3-year time span that we've done the histology data, what's really driving that younger females is the Gulf. So bioregion 3, in particular, if I look at a female from bioregion 3 right now, and it's at least 9 years old, it's almost guaranteed to be mature. It's got a very high proportion of maturity at a very young age. I think our 2024 estimate for region 3 A50 value is like 8.5 for region 3. So, and we also have large numbers of fish in region 3 estimated by our FIS index. So region 3 really is driving that estimate. Now, whether or not that holds true over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see. But region 3 is really got very young maturing females, in particularly compared to like Southeast, where we see a lot of older immature females. So what we're trying to decipher out is one, what's causing that, and two, maybe where are those fish going or where they come from, right? So some of those fish in 2C could maybe be foraging in the summer grounds, but maybe transiting somewhere else to go spawn, right? Or are those fish in the Gulf staying there to forage and to spawn. We don't know quite yet, but those are some answers. But really, it's bioregion 3 right now that's driving that very young female maturity.
And I would add that now that we have the results, we kind of know what the story is. But one of the big concerns going into this was that we had seen a multi-decade decline in size at age, and the visual maturity was telling us, but maturity hasn't changed at all. And we were like, ooh, really? It seems like what if we're getting this wrong? What if we're visually assessing these things, but actually maturity has shifted the other direction? And because they're small for their age, they're not maturing, but we're saying they're mature visually. So there was definitely some concern going into this project that we might that maturity at age might not be as stable as we thought. And it's actually kind of remarkable if you think about a fish maturing at 10 or 12 years old, and that fish is now maturing at a much smaller size than it used to. But it seems to be that age is the dominant thing. Like these fish, they mature at an age that's remarkably consistent regardless of how big they are, which is actually pretty interesting from a biological perspective and was a little worrisome until we had good lab data to tell us that.
Yeah. So we have run some models looking at size at maturity, length of maturity, and the model fits are not nearly as good as age. So there are a lot of fish stocks in the US and also worldwide where length is the better indicator of maturity. But for Pacific halibut, it's definitely age. Age is driving that better fit for maturity.
Where does the male halibut come into play here as far as maturity goes?
They're irrelevant.
We
have more than enough males.
If you ask a stock assessor, he'll say it's irrelevant. No, I'm kidding.
If you guys could figure out how to catch only males, it'd be game on.
Yeah. Males is a good question. We have done some preliminary histological work on males. So our first histology study that we did out of the Portlock region back in 2017, 2018, looking at females. We also collected males on that same study. And we've actually populated an annual reproductive cycle for males. And it does track the females pretty well. It seems to be that the males are what I would consider to be ready to go for a longer period of time than the females. So I think the males are developing at a quicker pace in the fall. They're anticipating that the females are going to be ready in the winter, but then they also tail off longer through the late winter months, even potentially early spring. And I think that's probably just because that way they're ready to go in case a female's around, that type of thing. So, but that's something that we have looked into, and males is something that we are still interested in biologically.
You sure you're not just projecting?
Sorry, it's a little informal, but I can't resist. I was at a sportsman's show, and this guy at this booth was selling halibut tackle, and he didn't know who we were, and he says, "You got to buy this one right here. This particular bait only catches female halibut. If you got to try this particular bait." And I was like, man, if you only knew how important it would be if you could target just males or females. I didn't tell him.
All this time it was right under your nose, Ian. You didn't even know.
How long is a 9-year-old halibut generally?
Don't we all have that chart stuck on the wheelhouse wall somewhere?
Let's see. We're seeing fish 9 years old is going to be probably on average about straddling the minimum size limit, maybe just a touch over on average.
For males too?
No, a 9-year-old male is going to be well below the size limit. Yeah, I think at one point, it's been a couple of years since I've updated the figure, but at one point, I think males on average, it took them about 4 years longer to get over the minimum size limit than females.
So these newly mature fish are getting discarded quite a bit, right?
Yeah, the minimum size limit does not protect the spawning stock for halibut. We catch a lot of fish that are not yet mature, and a lot of them get handled multiple times, and a lot of fish get retained that aren't even mature yet. It's the minimum size limit is not about protecting the spawning stock.
Right. I'm just saying that.
The the mention of the male halibut, I mean, we didn't really see them that much till we did a survey because there's under 32. So from the commercial side, we're letting them go. But when we did the survey, that's when we started noticing the males. But to that point is if we were wanting to target males, and aren't smaller fish typically in the nursery areas or what we've deemed to be nursery areas, could we do a survey, say in the Bering Sea closed area, where we see all the pollock trawlers dragging through? But that's another point. But if we were trying to focus on just looking at the males, wouldn't that be a good place to start?
Yeah, we've talked about trying to expand the survey to catch more younger fish to get access to get an earlier read on recruitments coming in. And one of the challenges is if you wanted to target males, we talked about this a little in the last size limit analysis. You want to target males, you end up just catching females that are younger and smaller that are the same size as the males you're looking for. So there's really no win in terms of trying to change. There's a little bit of a gain in adding more males to the catch in terms of the sex ratio of the catch by going to smaller sizes, but you offset that because now you're catching the females even earlier before, they've got even more growth potential to go. In terms of trying to expand the survey, we've talked about trying to do that in multiple ways, either with gear that would catch smaller fish, smaller hook sizes, or other areas. I guess the issues there are, other than getting a recruitment signal, we're already getting a good signal on the fish that are available to the fishery. And that's kind of the most important component that we're sampling. If we go to smaller hook sizes, we're likely to start catching all kinds of other species, especially in the shallow water. So that's kind of a non-starter. And in the Bering Sea, in what we would call a nursery area up there, we're actually getting a pretty good index from the trawl survey. The Bering Sea is the one place where the trawls really do get a good index of halibut. In the Gulf, the trawl survey just doesn't index halibut well at all. But in the Bering Sea, it seems to do a pretty good job. So we're already getting pretty good data for the Bering Sea, I would say, on the flats. The challenge in the Bering Sea is that the majority of the biomass occurs in areas that are basically not commercially viable to fish. So the majority of the biomass in the Bering Sea is on the flats. It's on the Bering Sea shelf, and the densities are low enough that you guys know there's no point in setting gear because the catch rate's not high enough to do you any good. The fish are there. It's a massive area with a really low density. So that's why we get this situation where we actually estimate quite a bit of biomass in the Bering Sea, but very little of that biomass is in a place you can go and fish on it. The Edge, the Pribilof Islands, and St. Matthew are basically the only places that have ever been fishable in the Bering Sea. And now with the Edge being lower than it was historically and having whales there, as you've pointed out in many meetings, Sean, the fishery is basically concentrated around the Pribilofs and St. Matthew now.
Mhm. I've got a question for Claude about, I'm going to date myself. It reminds me of from Get Smart, the cone of silence. I mean, probably half the people in this room probably don't remember what that even is, but one of the things that occurs to me is that thing is based 100% on crucifying every fish, right? Don't we kind of have an issue with that?
So this is regarding fish coming into the shuttle? Yeah. So certainly there's a regulation on the books, right, to have minimal harm when releasing sublegal fish. And it is something that potentially violates that issue. It's not careful shake. It's different than a fish stripper, but it's functionally largely the same when you look at the suite of injuries that the fish are suffering from.
It's humanely released. Okay.
So, right. So
Again,
there's a couple ways that can be addressed. One is through softer ganyons, softer hooks, different styles of hooks. The Norwegian inventor was out on the work with us, and he's come up with a couple approaches that could be done to, as it goes through the device, it rotates the hook very similar to the way engaging your gaff into the corner of the hook is done. At the same time, if you're doing that, you're going to have to then release a bunch of small fish that are not legal size at the surface, which may artificially keep the whales around you. As opposed to maybe the approach is if the whales are bad enough that you need to use this device to catch your quota, maybe in those cases when you're using it, it'd be better to have a regulation on the book that just says, in those cases when using the device, you have to retain all the halibut, so that you're not putting crumbs in the water to encourage the, kind of the bad bear behavior to keep going. And so we've been talking about both. We haven't arrived on a answer to that. We'd certainly appreciate hearing your input on that and your thoughts on those issues. They're generally not as clear cut as making a regulation change because the buyers are involved. The idea of keeping quota that's at a lower cost benefit to you is an economic, possibly non-starter or a challenge, certainly. There's a variety of things that you want to think about there, but you also want to think about even if you're to discard those at the dock, what's the end effect on the stock compared to having released fish being consumed by whales or continuing to feed whales an unknown amount of fish by not using the device at all. So there's a bunch of checks and balances there that kind of need to be considered.
I would just add to that Claude mentioned that we developed this calculator to look at this trade-off. So what I think at the end of the day, what we're interested in is which strategy minimizes the mortality for a given amount of fishing. And if you deploy the device and there's a lot of sublegals and no whales, you're certainly going to kill more fish with non-careful release of sublegals. But if you're in a situation where the whales are eating fish on the way up, they're eating fish on the way down, and you don't have very many sublegals, you may have a huge savings by using this device. And so I think that's our next goal, is to try to understand what conditions it makes sense to use it, where you're going to reduce the mortality, and what conditions it wouldn't. And actually, our preliminary look suggests that if the whales are around, it's going to be hard not to have some savings, even if you're damaging a fair number of sublegal fish, unless the number of sublegal fish you're encountering is just really, really high.
Are there any comments from those of you online, Tiare, Lauren, Brian, or Angus, on this topic or any other topics?
I've got nothing, but it is interesting discussion, definitely. Listening to some of that stuff, especially out in the Bering Sea, it's just big differences, and always appreciate hearing from people that actually fish out there.
Thanks, Brian. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Lauren. I don't have any comments, but yeah, I'll just echo what Brian said. It's been interesting to listen to, and I just read an article, I forget, might have been in like the Anchorage Daily News or something about the whale depredation device. So that sounded pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, we were talking about the halibut nursery grounds and trying to figure out just how big an area that covers. And I don't really think it went too far. I was wondering if there's been like a research search or investigations into other data that we might be able to access that would give us a better idea, like mock nesses or something like that. It was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, we were talking about the juvenile, the very small halibut growing up.
Yeah, you're right, Alex. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Well, we made a little bit of mention of that work earlier today, but yeah, that was presented probably 2 years ago. You're correct, and that was actually William Lay's internship project. So he was tasked to map juvenile Pacific halibut absence, presence, co-occurrence with other species like rock sole. In specific areas in Alaska. So he was mining data that was collected by researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 1995, 1996. Those are old data sets that didn't end up past the report stage. So we were really interested in analyzing that data a little further. So that was done specifically in areas around Kodiak and around Homer. Those two areas alone, those were the ones that were surveyed that year. So outside of that report that was discussed last year also, because there was a recommendation from the RAB, as you well know, about the need to continue that kind of work. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a whole lot more in further analyzing that data. Spatially was a little localized to two particular areas. Again, around Kodiak Island and Homer. There was nothing really on the Bering Sea, which is really one of the best known juvenile habitat for Pacific halibut. One of the problems that we have is that there's really almost no survey efforts that capture fish at that age. And we're talking fish from H0 to H2. So the availability of data during those 2 years that are critical for not just the survival, but also possibly determining future growth trajectories. That's something that's a knowledge gap for understanding, not just that particular stage in life history, but all other ones. And linking that to, spawning grounds, and then linking that to adult migrations. We still have that big knowledge gap. So, we appreciate the RAB, continuing pushing us to still think about that work. But it's in our, in fact, it's one of the line items in our next program of integrated research and monitoring. We have not forgotten that. We're actually thinking about this, and we're trying to find out ways to continue that work with further sample and data collection efforts. So, unfortunately, that's all I can say right now.
Ian, when will you think you'll have a definitive, if there is such a thing, answer about the fecundity in particularly older, more mature halibut? And when are you going to be able to come to, a decision about whether or not a halibut that's 100 pounds has twice as many eggs as a halibut that weighs 50 pounds?
Great question. It's going to take time. I'll put it that way. We have a lot of samples that are in-house that need to be processed. And you're looking at one person that's potentially processing them. No, but I've had we've had a lot of discussions with some people at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center who've been doing this work for over 10 years or more now. And they were pretty indicative that just to get the sample processing techniques set up, doing it correctly, and making sure that everything is right and how you're measuring the oocyte diameters and everything under the microscope. I know their process in particular for their research with some of their flounder, like summer and winter flounders that they have on the New England coastline. They said that it took like 3 to 4 years for them to get their process down properly. Now, I will note that this was a topic of discussion in our last couple of SRB meetings this summer. And I would say right now, the goal is to have some definitive data for the next full stock assessment. So Ian runs a full stock assessment every 3 years. This year was one of them. So right now, the goal is to potentially try to implement this in the next full stock assessment, which would be 2028. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
No, we have a question. I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead. If you have a follow-up.
Smart remark. So we could look for definitive data, but not necessarily a definitive answer.
We'll try our best. We have a question from Angus. Angus, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Recent
Angus, I don't know if you were speaking, but we cannot hear you.
Oh. You got nothing? Anything? Is that proof, I think?
Yeah, unfortunately, Angus, your sound is not coming through. Can our support team help Angus figure out the issue with his audio, please? Angus, I see that your mic is on again. Can you try again?
Gonna try. How about now?
Oh, better.
Anything?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. I apologize. Yeah, I'm just on my second family vacation here for 25 years, so I wanted to get this in. I'm not going to be able to attend tomorrow, but I had the recent experience of talking to a retired trawl skipper, and he basically said from the time they leave the dock to, or well, from the time they start fishing to the time they stop fishing, they have between 60 sea lions behind them and or orcas, and also hearing from trawlers, or well, from surveys up in the Bering Sea there, where they're scared to release halibut because they're worried that tags are going to be ingested by orcas. I just really think that we need to rethink our trawl mortality. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be closer to 100%. I mean, this guy has no skin in the game anymore. Anyway, I just want that on your guys' radar or something to look into.
Thank you, Angus. Appreciate your comment. Does anybody have a follow-up to Angus's more than a question, a comment?
Ditto. Yeah, Angus is absolutely right. Every trawler has got a full flock of sea lions and killer whales all the time. Actually, the feds have
I guess-
footage. Is that you,
Yeah, I
Angus?
guess a question for this is Brian Ritchie online. I guess I have a question for Angus or anyone who might know from 2B. Are there requirements on board those vessels that they stop deck sorting when? I mean, when there's whales present, I think we go to 100% mortality on board federally managed trawl vessels in the United States. So that is kind of accounted for as far as I understand, but I'm wondering if there's a similar regulation in Canada.
Yeah, I'd be speaking a bit out of my arse if I said that, but I believe there's probably something similar in place, but how stringently that gets monitored and what the actual, fine to have those regulations in place. But if there's nothing that can actually say, oh, there's whales, oh, it's nighttime, I can't see whales, and we all know how these things can be gamed.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe that's a good follow-up for DFO, and then I'll try to get some more information from NIPS in the next meeting. Thanks.
Is that for observed trips? Like what triggers that? The non.
Yeah, for observed trips and trips with EM, I think, if memory serves, but I'm really going to have to look that up or talk to OLE about it.
Thanks. There's no regulation in Canada for that. for anyone, trawl, longline, no one, for sure. There's not.
There is a regulation to report. Yeah, we have that in our longline fishery and as well, I believe, in the trawl fishery. But again, we're at 100% EM in our area now, and yeah, so don't like to take this stuff on trust or even on the word of observers. I really think we need to rethink trawl mortality.
Kevin, does this relate, does this discussion relate to your earlier comment this morning on trawling? related
Well,
issues?
probably not exactly, but it might be a good segue into it. Is that I'd like to go on record for the, on behalf of the halibut directed fisheries that I've been speaking with. And I heard earlier also about the trawl fleet maybe having a impact or a negative impact on the sand flea issue, going through grounds and disturbing and displacement. But I think it's time to look at, well, I'll give you a little history here of what I heard from our halibut directed fisheries is that during their fishery, the first time when they had real limited success, they actually had active fisheries of a shrimp fishery and the drag boats going through the halibut grounds while they're actively had their opener. And those fisheries aren't restricted for my understanding of when they can fish, opposed to the set regulatory dates that our halibut fishery is able to do that. And in that, the displacement and the mindset is that, well, if they're dragging the bottom through the same area that we're fishing our gear in a week prior or a few days prior to us fishing this, these fish are going to be dispersed and displaced out of here. And I think that through the VMS, vessel monitoring system, and the mandatory reporting, that there has to be some free information there that maybe an internship or the management side can look at to see if there's a correlation between trawl activity or drag boat activity and shrimp activity in the halibut grounds, say a week prior to the opener, and weigh that as far as if the success is lower when we have that type of activity and that confliction going on, or if there's any impact on the fishery. And I think we look at the great big picture of it, and there's got to be some de-escalation or deconfliction to go on if we do see that, if the evidence or this data scientifically can prove that, yes, there is a definite correlation between this fishery's activity in the halibut grounds or wherever if you probably have that up north. I can only speak for 2A out of the Oregon coast. It impacts us all. It impacts the assessments because if the catch rate is lower, then the money's not coming in for funding and research. And usually what we get or what we've heard and what we understand is that we don't set regulations here. We're a research advisory board, but there's got to be crosstalk to go on for there to be a solution. And I would like to see maybe some just data mining going on to look at the catch rate of this opener. Did we have other fisheries activity in those grounds? And if so, do we need to approach the regulatory board about a moratorium of that activity 1 week or however long prior to a fishery opening to not have conflicting fisheries? If that makes sense, if I've laid that out correctly. There's a lot of, I'll see at the dock talk, apparently I didn't hear it, but on the radio, it got to be where the drag boats were basically saying, I don't care. I'm going to go through your set. And they were actually actively going through guys' sets. There wasn't any loss of gear, but they were that active in the fishery. And it's pretty specific areas that our halibut fisheries in Oregon make their sets on. They don't have as many prolific grounds, so to speak. But they definitely don't have the sperm whale problem. But anyway, if that makes sense. Like to at least have some crosstalk go on and some maybe a great opportunity for some young scientists that's doing an internship to sit at a computer and crack those numbers. Third grade math was the hardest 4 years of my life, so I'll be no help on that. So, but
Thanks, Kevin. Anybody would like to follow up?
When you're talking about sea lice, what is that exactly?
What is that exactly?
Yeah. What organism? I know what they look like, but
Those are crustaceans, like, little shrimp. They can be up to a centimeter in length.
but do you know what the species name is?
There's 7,000 species
Oh,
of amphipods.
amphipods. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good enough for me.
Not all are predatory, and I say that because I did a little bit of reading recently on that. Not all are predators of fish. These are ectoparasites, so they start at the surface and they actually can insert themselves into the body cavity and basically cut the entire organism within a very, very short period of time. The density of those amphipods is tremendous in certain areas. So basically, when there's fish that are just a sack of bones, basically, when you get them up to the surface. Yeah. And mortality of fish caught on the line in samphlet infected areas is probably about 100%. Yeah. And I think there's actually a viability category, and Claude could chime in there, that one of the mortality associated viability categories includes samphlet intrusion. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So as Joseph alluded to, they're gamma-rid amphipods. There's thousands of species. From what we can tell, there's very little that's gone on to speciate the ones seen in the Pacific halibut fishery. There's likely more than one. They're very common in deep trenches and on whale falls. They're one of the biggest consumers of the whale falls. And certainly from our studies, if we tag and release fish that have any sand flea intrusion, I think we've had one that survived it. So we consider it 100% mortality if there's an intrusion. Typically it's around the eyes, mouth, or anus where you see the hole. And we've tried tagging them when the animal looks like it's largely good, but we don't get tag returns from those. So we consider it 100% mortality once they've had intrusion from them. Halibut are tough. They survive other injuries, like what we would consider catastrophic jaw injuries, quite well, but sand flea intrusion, not so much. And you could kind of see it in some of the video I showed earlier, but we can maybe show tomorrow at coffee break some of the other video. But we had a lot of sand fleas like people here today are talking about, and you literally will get a sack of skin that's just full of these little things, and it hits the device and just explodes into a cloud of sand fleas. So, yeah.
Yeah, following up on Ann's comment on sand fleas, I think this was one of the topics that I had down as a possible topic for discussion, because it's been mentioned by a number of you present here today. One of the issues is the reporting. We heard today that those are reported in Canadian laws. I think you mentioned that, Jason, before. That's mandatory. There was also a brief mention of whether that was possible also for the U.S. logs. I think currently it's not required to note the presence of sand fleas. So that would be something that would be interested in any kind of reporting and documentation and quantification and locations associated with space or certain geographic areas. That would be extremely interesting. We also heard a number of reports. Lando made one in which I think, Lando, you mentioned that there were actually areas where previously you had not ever found sand fleas, and now there are sand fleas presence. So whether that's a sign of sand fleas becoming more prevalent in Pacific halibut fishing grounds, that is possible. So I think more documentation on presence and location, I think, would benefit for a better understanding of, what are potential impacts and what areas, what conditions actually lead to increased sand flea presence. I think we also heard from potential trawling effects. I forgot. I don't know if it was you, Sean, that mentioned the fact that the increase in sand fleas in areas that had experienced trawl activity versus areas that did not, right? So was that specific for which region? You were talking about particularly for?
That was just a general, general comment or general area. I think it's not area specific. Just seems like where if you happen to be fishing in areas that have had heavy trawl activity, there's increased sand fleas. And also in U.S. fishing logbook, there is a column there that you have where you're supposed to check what's been damaged or how the fish were damaged. Whether there's killer whale, sperm whale, sea lion. Then I think there's an other block. I mean, if you educated the public or the skippers of the fleet that under the other block you could write in sand fleas, I mean that might be one step, but that's what the U.S. logbook looks like.
Also, I think
And
it's
that
really
was
easy.
echoed by me. Sorry, Angus from 2B. We've encountered that with trawl vessels as well in areas where there's been extensive trawling. The sand fleas seem to have increased.
That area off Kodiak Island specifically is, 40 years ago, we never really had a sand flea problem around there, but now that country is so beat down. And now there's sand fleas all through there. But, yeah. Also, sand fleas can be a time of year issue too. It isn't necessarily even in areas where there isn't trawling. So I guess it's kind of like just knowledge of the areas and the fisheries.
Yeah, so the timing has changed, and also we heard today that they're not just confined to sandy bottom now that
Right.
sand fleas are present in other types of bottom. So that's something.
Same with depths
consider.
too. They can be down 400 or 500 fathoms, or they can be up in the 40, 50 fathoms. One thing Bruce was talking to me about, he was on the surveys. It's a little bit of a twist in the subject, but like out in 3B, for example, I get in those heavy peacock areas when you got to set a certain time on your survey that there's so much peacock on the grounds, they occupy the gear. And when we're fishing halibut in those areas, a lot of times we'll end up holding off, setting gear later, a little bit later in the morning, get away from that 5 to, I think you typically start setting about 5.
Right then, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of times I'll hold off till 7 or 8 and just that little more daylight or whatever it is, but there's a definite.
Yeah, but we only get one in then because we run so far between
I know.
strings, right?
Yeah.
The other ones are late.
Well, I don't know. It's heavy peacock. Yeah, but those areas that are really heavy on peacock, it can be I think they can skew the survey pretty easily. If a guy could adjust their set time a little bit.
Do the sand fleas have any known predators? Do they just live and die, or does the trawling affect any of their predation? Or
So we've tried to look up research on it. It's very limited. I think there's not a lot of money in it for researchers to pursue it. Frankly, just speaking honestly, we were a bit shocked with the footage on the control gear. In my head, I see sand fleas that they show up when you're sampling a halibut on deck, and there's all these sand fleas stuck to the side of them, and they're all just kind of all over the sampling table. But on the footage underwater, they're actively swimming. I in my head, they were crawling across the muddy bottom, sandy bottom, and then getting on a halibut that's restrained and gotten so fatigued that it's now tired and can't get away from them. But it's like a snowstorm of them underwater. They're actively swimming in the bottom, I don't know, 5 feet of water. So the other thing, they seem to be so aggressive about how they eat that if you swallowed them alive, I suspect they'd eat their way out. Like, no joke. Like they are that sharp and aggressive about getting through. So
They do to halibut, right?
possibly,
they
yeah,
go up
right.
The anus or through the eyes and just eat them from the inside out.
Right. So does anything eat them? We've wondered that watching that video footage, because there's other stuff coming in to eat krill and stuff that's being drawn to the lights that we're using. And that got us thinking about, well, what's eating the sand fleas? Good question.
She's looking down our row, Lando.
Old guy row.
So if we wanted to collect the data about the sand fleas, right? And if we wanted to do that for the field staff, would it be sufficient for field staff to interview the captain after coming back to the port? Would they be able to recall which set specifically were affected? Or we would have to ask captains to first really record it by each set as they fill their logbook during that time? And I'm looking at both rows.
I would say just have the port samplers ask us. And because I find that they prompt my memory. And they're really, well, we know most of them anyway. There's, but I think just have the port samplers ask.
Or maybe both, you know. I think Sean's, I mean, there is that other thing, that other box in there that we could, and then, you know, then that would be a quick, it's just as easy as filling out, you know, there was 5 orcas and they, you know, they impacted 20 fish or something. When you're in sand fleas, they can impact the whole damn set, you know, so that's reflective in your catch rate and the other boxes and stuff like that. And the port sampler, sometimes they're not there. And sometimes you're really busy trying to get your fish off your boat and out of town and all that stuff. So I think maybe both would probably be, and if it's becoming an issue, which it seems like it is, that all the documentation or all the data, the more data, the better. And it's not that hard to fill out the other box. And then you have a fresh memory of it, and it's more accurate what you're writing down than what you're trying to convey to a, you know, how are your sand fleas? Really bad, you know?
And it's, you know, I presume there's a box about soak time, right? On the logbooks now?
Correct. We do collect the information about the when the gear was set and when the gear was hauled, and we can calculate from that the soaking time.
Yeah, because that's obviously a critical factor in how much you observe the predation of sand fleas.
Yeah, so that's why I'm just wondering whether, so soak time though is still in general optional, so this is not required by the IPHC regulations, but it is generally filled in the logbooks, and we do encourage to fill that information, and then we collect that for a large number of vessels. So there's always an option to provide additional information. So we could always ask for, as you said, if this is a topic of interest, maybe there are 2 options. We could certainly, if there was a, you know, specific regulatory proposal, we could introduce that and have it as a mandatory field in the logbook. That's one way, very formal, versus doing it more of a informal way where we spread word around the fleet that this is something that it's important for research purposes, trying to understand the specific aspect of the fishing, and we can collect that information as the captains include that in the logbooks or as a part of the interview for the field staff.
Yeah, I'm going to think that since you already have to fill logbooks, there's already all the spaces and they're being changed anyway. It's a good time to add it. That'd be my thought on that.
I would agree, and it just it's a matter of advertising. I mean, there's occasionally you guys advertise something about a tag or careful release of halibut or whatever. I mean, maybe where the skipper does his landing with that cannery, there's a advertisement there to encourage you to write that in the other block. And I don't think most people have a problem with it. It's just they're not educated to do that. So.
It's not a secret. It's just nobody knows to look for it.
Yeah, the RAB members will probably have noticed that when the slide showing the ineffective stations, that there was a line item on sand fleas, and in particular for this year, I think there was one station that was deemed ineffective in 4A. Tyler, can you explain what's the criteria for classifying a station ineffective based on sand flea?
Right.
presence?
So in order to have, it's pretty strict. So in order for it to have an actual station deemed ineffective, there has to be some sort of expectation that there's proof of halibut actually falling off the line. So in most cases, we're guessing that even though all you're getting back is fish bones, you're at least the hook staying in and the fish are coming up. But if it's getting to the point where they're actually falling off the line as they break the water, that's when we call it ineffective. So that doesn't happen often, and it's probably a pretty conservative estimation of whether we're accounting for all the fish. That's the only actual way that we can verify that there's fish flying off the line. So that's how we currently have that laid out. Yeah, but we do have data for every single fish that comes up that has specifically sand fleas that has entered the body cavity. So if there's sand, even if there's sand fleas around the eyeball, around the anus, we mark each of those fish as sand fleed in a comment section. So you could potentially have percent of catch sand fleed going back as far as I can remember here. So we have that information. You could overlay that information against probably trawl survey data or trawl data, I imagine. So you could probably come up with some pretty neat results, right? Over temporal information too through the year, or even tie that to the CCAT information, the temperature at the bottom or something, all sorts of things. So see if there's any type of relationships that might occur. So I think there's definitely a treasure trove of data that span pretty far back in the FIS database that's standardized, that you guys could find, or we could find something pretty cool.
And I think that's a really good point, because if we wanted to collect that information from the commercial sector, also we would have to do some work to properly define what is, the level of sand fleas that should be reported, to standardize that. And then there's always question of how you want to do it in IPHC logbook versus obviously there are other logbooks that are approved for reporting Pacific halibut, how to deal with this. So that's a little bit more complicated than just saying, hey, we're going to be reporting sand fleas. We would have to establish criteria and also, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and all our soak times are 5 hours or longer. So there is that caveat. So it'd be interesting maybe to see if you guys are soaking things under 5 hours, if there's still that type of effect. But yeah, for our FIS data, it's 5 hours and longer.
The thing that we would be missing with the survey is the seasonal aspect that Jim and others have mentioned, is that we only get data in the summer. So if there's certain areas that are only getting bad in the fall or the early spring, we'd only be able to get that data from the commercial fishery. So I think there's definitely some value in trying to put the two sources together.
I've watched you do surveys down around Ketchikan at times. I wonder how in the world you get anything out of that country except bear hooks. Because when I sat there, I sat one set and I soak it maybe an hour and a half and we're hauling. And then I'll set it again because it's only one set at a time because that bottom is so hot. So I've often wondered on those surveys, watching a survey boat run around, drop these sets and go, okay, how can they do what I can't do? But they're not.
Jason, since you mentioned the logbook recording of SANFLI data, how is that recorded? I mean, is it just a mention whether there were SANFLIs present? Yes, no, or is there any more detailed information by set, for instance?
I know that there's a whole new pilot study look at making sure that there's no taking advantage in the Canadian fleet of that provision for licensed fish that get to be discarded without being counted against the quota, right? So they are doing additional monitoring, as Jason mentioned. So a little bit on that is also included in the Secretariat report. But we also do have the data from the DFO, so we can provide some summaries on the amount, like a volume of fish that is reported in Canadian fisheries as discarded because of affected by.
Any other comments on sea lice related issues? Since we've got about 10 minutes before we should be breaking out, are there any specific questions? There's a few topics that will definitely fill up the time tomorrow, but are there any specific questions over this last 5-10 minutes on things covered today?
Well, Bruce, you brought it up. So I don't know if this is the place to talk about budgetary concerns or who pays what. I've been here for 12 years or something, and it's rarely come up. You know, Bruce Lehman asked me to join this when we caught a big halibut that everybody said, "Oh my God, you're raping the ocean." So that does beg. It's just my mind's going, well, I mean, I'm not sure at other levels how you're anticipating this to come up. Obviously, you said as much, but what is the overall budget here? And, you know, we just saw that the survey is going to lose money, $1 million or $500,000. And so you're trying to find a way to boil that down to zero. But what is the budget? Here I am as kind of a layman and naive. I heard the United States is going to, I'm not picking sides either. I mean, I'm a charter guy. And, you know, you guys are commercial guys. We don't do that to each other here. So I don't think you have to worry about anybody thinking you're being antagonistic. I'm certainly not. And I know Lando wasn't either. But the question becomes is what is the budget here? And we talked a lot about it last year. And I don't recall if you were here. or not. But we talked a lot about the, the survey budget and getting people to do the survey and how we're going to pay for it. And so I'm just curious. So why doesn't the Canadian government pitch in some money? I'm curious what the overall budget even looks like and how, if it costs a couple $1 million to do the survey and you want to catch halibut to pay for that, what pays for the rest of the halibut commission? Because I'm clueless. And since we only have 5 or 10 minutes, I thought I'd throw
Yeah,
that out.
that may take a little more than 5 minutes.
I can give you 5 minutes worth.
Great.
But it's a really good point. So maybe tomorrow we can actually bring a few things up on the screen just to have a bit more context about the budget situation. Sort of on any given year. And if I just look at last fiscal year, and our budget has been reduced over the last number of years, both for our general operating, but also for the survey. So our general operating is around anywhere from 6 to 9 million. In recent years, it's been about, let's say, 6.5 on average. So that's our general operating expenses. And so not including the survey. And about, I'm going to say 4/5 of it comes from the US, so Department of Commerce. And that's directly through our requests. And we have a split that's around 82% US, 18% Canada. And that's just the percentage that we apply for each operating budget each year and pass that to the commission. And then they say yay or nay or modify it. And so that's our general operating. The Fishery Independent Setline Survey, it costs anywhere from a couple of million, so 1.7 million was our budget for last year. And with all of the add-ons, with the fecundity study and those sorts of things, we receive, sorry, I'm going to step back there. So that was what we budgeted as income, about 1.7 million. And the total survey cost 2.6, including the fecundity study components. But it's varied. Again, if I look when I first arrived, when we were doing the expansion, the survey budget was about $6.5 million. And so it's been shrunk that much. I think, and if the team can correct me, I think it was about 1,500 to 1,600 stations during the maximum of expansion. And now it's down 500 or so. And you saw the numbers, between 500 and 600 the last year. What was this year? 515. And so it's proportionally, it's much lower. In addition, we receive about $750,000 from the Alaska Cost Recovery Program to fund port sampling in Alaska waters, and in 2A and Canada, those activities are funded from those contracting party contributions that I was speaking of. And so that's another 750. And then research grants, anywhere from a couple of $100,000 is sort of on average to undertake specific research projects each year. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. If we look at the Fishery Independent Setline Survey last year, it came out revenue positive, about $712,000. And cheers. And so that's $712,000 that we are going to apply for use in 2026, and also to build the reserve to protect ourselves in the future. And that precise split of how much we're going to put in the bank and keep for less profitable years is versus actually using to undertake additional stations in 2026 is to be determined on the 2nd of December, when the Commission looks at that final version. We're pretty confident that they will adopt the supplemented reduced loss design. So I think that was about $500,000 revenue negative. And so we'll use a portion of that carryover from this year to cover that, and hopefully fish prices will be higher. And so we won't have to use it all. That's the quick version. And so maybe tomorrow we can have a look at some more details.
That was plenty for my head. But so Bruce, I was curious, you suggested that the survey, by sampling, the Canadian sector, 2C, 2B, is that what it is? I'm sorry. What? Yeah, the Canadian sector. By sampling that, taking halibut away from I presume, that could be caught off of Canadian quota and using it to fund, other research or the rest of the survey. That was what Canadian fishermen or the Canadian sector might object to. Is that accurate?
Sure. There's multiple arguments that go on all the time. The Americans get cranky saying they're only 18% of the fish and they've got 50% of the vote with the commissioners. And then the Canadians say, the survey fish is moving more towards revenue and we're more away from science. And exactly that. We're paying the price with our resource for the science unduly, right? I don't particularly agree with all of it. I think everybody has to worry about that. And I think the Canadians, maybe David, you know a lot more about this than I do, came to the table with some DFO money early on, and the Americans did match it or exceeded it. And now with our new government, which I won't even talk about where all that is, none of us can probably in this room, but sounds like that's dried up this year possibly, and that's going to be a problem too, right? So it's a yin and the yang of this whole argument, and now that Blake isn't coming to the meetings anymore, the Canada-US fighting has gone down a lot. Yeah, so but there are some fundamental conflicts between the science methodology of the Canadians and the Americans as well, this apportionment thing, and so, which I don't know a whole lot about, but yeah. So what you're saying is right. We're going to have to stand up and talk to all of these different things. Some guys are right, some guys are wrong. And you end up with a kind of consensus basically, and then the commissioners go back and adjudicate on all of that, all those arguments. Am I right? I shouldn't be answering this question, David. You should.
Not necessarily should, but you summarized it well. And as you know, DFO, across the entire Canadian government, there's going to be some significant budget cuts this coming year. And so whether they will be able to match or even partially contribute supplementary funds to the FIS for this coming year is highly uncertain at the moment. And so that really comes into consideration as we're looking at planning not only 2026 FIS design, but future years. We were hoping that we would be able to have this reduced design just for a couple of years and then get back to the base block design. But it's just highly uncertain at the moment. Look, with that and with the microphones dying, I'm going to suggest we close for today. And it's only a short walk down the road and continue the discussions off mic. And then have a think about tomorrow, and let's come back and have a fruitful session first thing in the morning. Any last words, Giuseppe?
No, just as a reminder, the address for those of you who need the address is right there. It's 4441 26th Avenue. It's, as I said, it's about 3 blocks away. It's a 7-minute walk, but for those of you driving, there's parking around on the street. So we look forward to seeing you, and we look forward to the discussion tomorrow. So thank you very much.